You would think that for $60 plus overseas shipping, HORI's Tatacons would be plenty functional enough for mid-level play, maybe even high-level play. But alas, they are not. Out of the box, you really have to hit the drum hard for it to register anything, making it pretty much useless for serious play beyond the normal difficulty. Thankfully, however, members of the community have figured out ways to modify their Tatacons with relative ease and at a relatively low cost. The only problem is, as far as I know, there's really only one in-depth tutorial on the internet, the Dollroom guide, and it's in Japanese. It's an excellent guide, don't get me wrong, it's the only thing I followed when I modified my Tatacon, but the only way to find it is through a Reddit post by GMM Awesome on the Taiko no Tatsujin subreddit, and overall I just found it rather difficult to access. As such, my goal here is to make a more accessible tutorial to make the modification process a little easier for anyone else interested in getting their money's worth for HORI's drum-shaped paperweight. This process works for both the Switch Tatacon and the PS4 Tatacon. I believe the only difference is the number of cost sensors on the inside. Real quick, I want to give a proper shout out to GMM Awesome on Reddit and the creator of the Dollroom guide, as I wouldn't have been able to do all this without them. Links to them will be in the description. The Tatacon mod requires two materials, cork and adhesive rubber. The cork needs to be 1 centimeter thick to match the foam inside the drum. I've also heard of people using wood for this mod. Apparently it gives the dons more bounce, allowing for better rolls, but obviously it's a lot easier to cut cork into the shape you need. I'll leave a link to the cork I used in the description. The rubber should be around 1 millimeter thick. It's easier if it comes with adhesive, though you can also use thin double-sided tape to make it stick. Again, link in the description for the rubber I used. As for tools, you'll need a box cutter, a hole punch, scissors, a marker, maybe some tweezers, and a number 1 Phillips head screwdriver. Keep in mind you're going to need a rather thin screwdriver to fit into the narrow screw holes on the back. Once you've gathered everything, you're good to go. Quick warning, once you start disassembling the drum, I'm pretty sure any warranty you might have had will be voided, just letting you know. Anyway, start by removing the legs of the drum and unscrew the 5 screws on the back. Make sure you put the screws somewhere you won't lose them. Be careful lifting up the back cover as there are wires connected to a small motherboard. Unplug the 3 small wires. Underneath the connectors you'll see labels for ZL and ZR. It might be helpful to label their respective wires so that you don't switch them up later. As for the big wire, unplug it if you can. I fiddled with the thing for 20 minutes and it wouldn't budge, but you can move on without disconnecting it, so don't destroy your fingers, 'cause you're gonna need them for the next step. The face of the drum is held in place by a bunch of rubber protrusions jammed into these little hooks. Let me tell you, these little guys are devils. At first I tried removing them with just my fingers, but, as the Dollroom guide warned, it hurt like a bitch, so instead I invented my own method of getting them out. The best way I can explain it is I wedged my screwdriver behind each protrusion and pushed on either side with my thumbs. Just be mindful of the green sensors and make sure you don't damage them. Once you've freed all the protrusions, you can move on to the rest of the disassembly. Carefully reach underneath the face of the drum and lift out the insides. Be careful lifting it out if you didn't disconnect the large wire before. When it's out, you should see the button panel and the DON sensor covered with a rubber mesh. Put the face of the drum off to the side, as you won't need it until you reassemble later. The DON sensor is connected to a ribbon cable that hinges through the top of the drum. Flip the DON sensor up to reveal the foam underneath. At last, it's time to start the modification. Remove the foam from the drum and grab your cork. Place the foam onto the cork and trace out the shape with a marker. Oh look, there's me not knowing where the camera's pointing. Anyway, grab your box cutter and something to catch the scraps, because it turns out cork sheds more debris than a Nature Valley bar. Cut the pattern out of the cork and don't worry if it's not exact. As long as it's sort of correct and not too big, it'll work just fine. You need to leave enough room for the face of the drum to slot in between the button panel and the cork, so if it comes out too big, like it did when I first cut it out, you'll need to shave off the excess. Once the cork is ready, place it inside the drum and flip the Dawn sensor back on top. Peel the existing rubber mesh off and grab your rubber sheet. Similarly to the cork, trace out the shape of the mesh onto the rubber sheet. In addition, you need to mark 4 spots on the rubber sheet to match the protrusions on the Dawn sensor. Those spots are labeled here. Cut out the shape from the rubber sheet with scissors and punch holes in the 4 spots from before with a hole puncher. Before sticking the rubber onto the Dawn sensor, make sure the holes line up with the protrusions. If they don't, just make the holes bigger, as the size of the holes won't impact the sensitivity all that much. Once the new rubber is stuck on, the Dawn mod is complete, which means all that's left is the KA mod. Ugh, the KA mod. Every HORI drum KA sensor is personalized. In the Dollroom guide, she wrapped a strip of rubber entirely around the KA sensors and noted that it still wasn't sensitive enough to her liking. However, other people online claim that doing so made the KAs too sensitive and resulted in false positives. The point I'm trying to make is that the process of modifying the KAs is pretty much trial and error. The concept here is to place small strips of rubber along the tops of the individual KA sensors. This creates more pressure between the face of the drum and the sensors, thus reducing the amount of force you need to trigger a KA. As you see here, I cut out a long strip of rubber about half a centimeter thick and cut that strip into KA sensor-sized pieces. However, I'd recommend only 3 or 4 millimeters if you can cut that precisely. I'll explain why later. I then pasted those pieces onto the tops of the sensors along the small ridge containing the Dawn sensor. You want to make sure they're against this ridge, as placing them any lower increases the risk of getting false positives. If modifying the KAs in this way does increase the sensitivity for you, I would stick with it, as disassembling the drum several times is a major pain. For me, doing it this way produced no noticeable increase in KA sensitivity. So off camera, I wrapped an entire strip around the sensors similarly to the Dollroom guide. However, in doing so, I made the KA too sensitive. So I opened the drum up a 3rd time and shaved off a millimeter or 2 from the rubber strip. This fixed the problem, which leads me to believe that the sensitivity depends more on how thick the rubber is, especially if you wrap the entire strip around. As I mentioned before, I think the sweet spot is 3 or 4 millimeters. Although my KAs still aren't as sensitive as I'd like them, I really don't feel like opening it up anymore. Slot the face of the drum back into the front. You might need to give it a bit of a squeeze around the rim in order to get it to set properly. Push the rubber protrusions back into the hooks. If you're having trouble, you can use the screwdriver to help you here. Plug the wires into their respective slots on the motherboard and slot the front of the drum into the back cover. At this point, you might want to test the drum to ensure the sensitivity is to your liking. Finally, flip the drum over, screw the 5 screws back in, and pop the legs back in. I hope this tutorial helped you out. I apologize for the awkward footage. This is my first time doing this kind of thing, so I don't have any kind of proper setup. If you have any questions or remarks, leave them in the comments and I'll try to reply in a timely manner. Thanks for watching.